A Course in Miracles, Urtext Manuscripts, complete 7-volume combined edition. Volume 1, the text. Chapter 1, Introduction to Miracles. T1a, Introduction. It is crucial to say first that this is a required course. Only the time you take it is voluntary. Free will does not mean that you can establish the curriculum. It means only that you can elect what to take when. It is just because you are not ready to do what you should elect to do that time exists at all. You will see miracles through your hands, through me. You should begin each day with the prayer, "Help me to perform whatever miracles you want of me today." A Course in Miracles, Urtext Manuscripts, complete 7-volume combined edition. Volume 1, Chapter 1, Section B, Principles of Miracles. The first thing to remember about miracles is that there is no order of difficulty among them. One is not harder or bigger than another. They're all the same.
Miracles do not matter. They are quite unimportant.
They occur naturally as an expression of love. The real miracle is the love that inspires them. In this sense, everything that comes from love is a miracle.
This explains the first point related to the lack of order. All expressions of love are maximal.
This is why the thing in itself does not matter. The only thing that matters is the source, and this is far beyond human evaluation.
Question and answer regarding first 3 points. Question. Helen, would you regard this communication as a kind of miracle? Answer. There is nothing special or surprising about this at all. The one thing that happened was the universal miracle, which was the experience of intense love that you have felt. Don't get embarrassed by the idea of love. Embarrassment is only a form of fear, and actually a particularly dangerous form because it reflects egocentricity.
Do not feel guilty about the fact that you are doubting this. Just reread them and the truth will come to you. I love you and I'm not afraid or embarrassed or doubtful. My strength will support you. So don't worry and leave the rest to me. But when you see Bill, be sure to tell him how much he helped you through by giving you the right message. And don't bother with worrying about how you received it. That doesn't matter either. You were just afraid.
Helen fearful in taxi about a communication which related Dave's healing and Jonathan's hernia. She thought it would be safer to disassociate the two. Instructions were, refer to point 1 and reread now.
All miracles mean life, and God is the giver of life. He will direct you very specifically.
Plan ahead is good advice in this world, where you should and must control and direct where you have accepted responsibility. But the universal plan is in more appropriate hands. You will know all you need to know. Make no attempts to plan ahead in this respect.
Miracles are habits and should be involuntary. They should not be under conscious control. Consciously selected miracles are usually misguided, and this will make the talent useless.
Miracles are natural. When they do not occur, something has gone wrong.
Miracles are everyone's right, but purification is necessary first.
Miracles are a form of healing. They supply a lack and are performed by those who have more for those who have less.
Miracles are a kind of exchange. Like all expressions of love, which are always miraculous in the true sense, the exchange reverses the physical laws.
A miracle is a reversal of the physical order because it brings more love to the giver and the receiver. A miracle is misunderstood when it is regarded as a spectacle.
The use of miracles as a spectacle to induce belief is wrong. They are really used for and by believers.
Helen has some fear about 11 and doubt about 9 and 10, probably doubt induced by fear of 11.
When you say, "If you want me to, I will," please add, "and if you don't want me to, I won't." This is the right use of inhibition. There has to be some control over learning for channelizing purposes. Remember retroactive inhibition, which should be easy enough for you.
Sometimes the new learning is the more important and has to inhabit the old. It is a form of correction.
Prayer is the medium of miracles. Prayer is the natural communication of the created with the Creator. Through prayer, love is received, and through miracles, love is expressed.
Miracles are thought creations. Thought can create lower order or higher order realities. This is the basic distinction between intellectualization and thinking. One creates the physical and the other the spiritual, and we believe in what we create.
A miracle is a beginning and an ending. It thus abolishes time. It is always an affirmation of rebirth, which seems to go back but really goes forward. It undoes the past in the present and thus releases the future.
Miracles attest to truth. They are convincing because they arise from conviction. Without conviction, they deteriorate into magic, which is mindless and therefore destructive, or rather, the uncreative use of mind.
Each day should be devoted to miracles. God created time so that man could use it creatively and convince himself of his own ability to create. Time is a teaching device and a means to an end. It will cease when it is no longer useful for facilitating learning.
Special instructions. Notes on this course have to be taken only under good learning conditions. The same goes for review periods. I will tell you when, but remember to ask.
Miracles are teaching devices for demonstrating that it is more blessed to give than to receive. They simultaneously increase the reserve strength of the giver and supply the lack of strength in the receiver. Be very careful in interpreting this.
Instructions. The purpose of this course is integration. I told you that you will not be able to use it right until you have taken it. As long as your identification vacillates and Bill's is weak, you cannot accept the gift that belongs to you. You are still vacillating between recognizing the gift and throwing it away. Bill regards himself as too weak to accept it. You do not yet know its healing power. After you have passed the course, you will accept it and keep it and use it. This is the final exam, which you will have no trouble in passing. Midterm marks are not entered on the permanent record.
Miracles are the absence of the body. They are sudden shifts into invisibility, away from the lower order reality. That is why they heal.
A miracle is a service. It is the maximal service that one soul can render another. It is a way of loving your neighbor as yourself. The doer recognizes his own and his neighbor's inestimable value simultaneously.
This is why no areas of hatred can be retained. If you retain them, your own value is no longer inestimable, because you are evaluating it as X, or infinity minus that amount. This is meaningless mathematically, which uses the term inestimable only in the very literal sense. Pun intended especially for Bill, who originally did not get it. Intended as a special sign of love.
Miracles rest on the law and order of eternity, not of time.
Miracles are an industrial necessity. Industry depends on cooperation, and cooperation depends on miracles.
Miracles are cobwebs of iron. They unite human frailty to the strength of God.
At 421, Helen considered changing iron to steel. Correction, no. Steel would not be a better word. Steel is very useful, but it would have to be tempered by fire. Iron is the raw material. The point of miracles is that they replace fire, thus making it unnecessary.
Miracles are natural expressions of total forgiveness. Through miracles, man accepts God's forgiveness by extending it to others. The second step is inherent in the first because light cannot tolerate darkness. Light dispels darkness automatically by definition.
Explanatory instructions. Miracles are associated with fear only because of the fallacy that darkness can hide. Man believes that he cannot see what he cannot see does not exist, and his physical eyes cannot see in the dark. This is a very primitive solution and has led to a denial of the spiritual eye, which always depends on light. Remember the biblical injunction, "May I never forget that thine eye is ever upon me, beholding the evil and the good."
There are two stages, one lower and one higher, which are involved in the escape from darkness. One, the recognition that darkness cannot hide. This usually does entail fear.
Two, the recognition that there is nothing you want to hide, even if you could. This brings escape from fear.
Corrections regarding part 21, cobwebs of iron. This is upside down as stated. The part about uniting human frailty with the strength of God is all right, but the explanation stops too soon. If iron is the raw material, cobwebs cannot become the iron. That is only the way it seems, because cobwebs are associated with the frailty and iron with strength. If you look carefully at the phrasing, you will see it is reversed. One point already tells you that miracles reverse the physical or lower order laws.
The raw material, or iron, is heavy but crude and stands for the body, which is a crude creation. The cobweb concept is closer to how the body should be regarded, that is, as an airy and temporary home which can just be blown away by a slight breeze.
The point should read, a miracle reawakens the awareness that the spirit and not the body is the altar of truth. This is the recognition that leads to the healing power of the miracle.
A miracle rearranges the order of perception and places the levels in their true perspective. This heals at all levels because all sickness comes from confusing the levels.
Tell Bill about the idea, which is still dim to Helen, that the reason is not that you, plural, distantiate, doubt, or cannot believe. It is more of a reaction formation against a pull which you both recognize is so intense that you're afraid that you will be uprooted. But remember that a cobweb is really stronger than the iron if you see it properly. This fear is also why you couldn't get the point straight.
By the way, it is not true that you are both just scribes. You might remember that the scribes were very wise and holy men and are even sometimes spelled with a capital S. If you want to go further, you might change the meaning of just from merely to honest, a term used in the Bible in association with might or strength. Tell Bill you couldn't make that pun if the original phrasing had been singular. Helen aside about liking the first about assumption failure more. Answer: it was cuter, but this one means more. The real reason you don't like it is because it refers to you in a very lofty position. This makes you nervous.
Correction. And don't lose sight of the emphasis on cooperation or the not singular. That point about industrial necessity should read corpora, referring to the body of Christ, which is a way of referring to the church. But the church of God is only the sum of the souls he created, which is the corporate body of Christ. Correct to read, a miracle makes souls one in God, and leave in the next part about cooperation.
Further correction, God should read Christ. The Father and the Son are not identical, but you can say like Father, like Son.
Remind Bill to get another notebook. I don't give up as easily as he does. If I could get you to listen, which was a miracle in itself, I can get him to register. He should appreciate this more than anyone else, having had some trouble with this problem himself.
Lord, heal me is the only legitimate prayer. This also means, Lord, add one for me, because the only thing man should pray for is forgiveness. He has everything else.
Now take this personally and listen to divine logic. If when you have been forgiven, you have everything else, and if you have been forgiven, then you have everything else.
This happens to be the simplest of all propositions. If P, then Q. P, therefore Q.
The real question is P true? If you will review the evidence, I think you will find this inescapable. I went on very personal record to this effect, and I am the only completely true witness for God. You have every right to examine my credentials. In fact, I urge you to do so. You haven't read the Bible in years.
Special explanatory note. As soon as you, Helen and Bill, have entered the second phase, you will not be only willing to enter into communion, but will also understand peace and joy. Your commitment is not yet total. That is why you still have more to learn than to teach. When your equilibrium stabilizes, you can teach as much as you learn. This will give you the proper sense of balance. Meanwhile, remember that no effort is wasted. Unless you remember this, you cannot avail yourself of my efforts, which are limitless.
Have a good day. Since only eternity is real, why not use the illusion of time constructively? You might remember that underneath are the everlasting arms.
Biblical quotation. If you are as ashamed of me before men, I will be ashamed of you before God. Helen of misquote is interpreted as threat only as long as you remain in the first step. See bottom of page 6 for steps.
What it really means is that if you are ashamed of me or embarrassed by love, you will project and therefore make it impossible for me to reach you. Make every effort you can not to do this. I will help you as much as you will let me.
Miracles make time and tide wait for all men. They can heal the sick and raise the dead because man himself made both death and taxes and can abolish both. Tax also means strain. One definition for miracles is that which or one who is of surpassing excellence or merit. From dictionary, third definition.
You are a miracle. God creates only that which or one who is of surpassing excellence or merit. Man is capable of this kind of creation too, being in the image and likeness of his own creator. Anything else is only his own nightmare and does not exist. Only the creations of light are real.
Miracles are a part of an interlocking chain of forgiveness, which, when completed, is the atonement. This process works all the time and in all dimensions of time. Miracles are a part of an interlocking chain of forgiveness, which, when completed, is the atonement. This process works all the time and in all dimensions of time. For example, given of Helen report rewrite for Esther. Esther had heard something you loved. By writing a report you regarded as very bad. You atoned for her by writing one in her name that was very good. Actually, it was not your responsibility professionally to do this, but because you do love the shield, you recognize that in this case you are your brother's keeper. While you did not cancel Esther's sin, later defined as lack of love, you did cancel out its effects.
Someday I want to tell Esther that not only is she forgiven, but that the effects of all her sins are cancelled. This is what I have already told you. When I can tell her, she will be afraid for a long time, because she will remember many things, consciously or unconsciously, including the shield report, a lack of love which you cancelled out in advance by a miracle of devotion.
I am in charge of the process of atonement, which I undertook to begin. My atonement was for the cancelling out of all sins, that is, lack of love, which human beings could not otherwise correct. That is what the biblical statement, underneath are the everlasting arms, mean. Helen explanation. This means that he will backstop whenever human miracles will not suffice for atonement purposes. However, it is perfectly clear that when a person can atone by miracles, both giver and receiver are atoning. It is better to atone this way because of the mutual benefits involved. Inasmuch as you do it unto the least of these, my children, really ends with you do it unto yourself and me. The reason why you come before me is because I do not need miracles for my own atonement, but I stand at the end in case you fail temporarily.
Special explanation in response to Helen's request regarding possible corrections. Change the word sin to absence of love. Sin is a man-made word and with threat connotations which he made up himself. No real threat is involved anywhere. Just because nature abhors a vacuum, which is true enough, it does not follow that a vacuum is filled with hellfire. Nothing is gained by frightening yourself, and it is very destructive. Miracles need freedom from fear. Part of their atonement value involves just that. Note that the word atone really means undo.
The purpose of the atonement is to restore everything to you. That is, to restore the awareness. Later clarification. You had everything when you were created, just as everyone did.
Having been restored to your original state, you naturally become part of the atonement yourself. You now share my inability to tolerate the lack of love in yourself and in everyone else, and must join the great crusade to correct it. The slogan for this crusade is listen, learn, and do.
This means listen to my voice, learn to undo the error, and do something to correct it.
The first two are not enough. The real members of my party are active workers.
The power to work miracles belongs to you. I will create the right opportunities for you to do them, but you must first be ready and willing to do them, since you are already able to. Doing them will bring conviction in the ability. I repeat that you will see miracles through your hands, through mine, Conviction really comes through accomplishment. Remember that the ability is the potential, achievement is its expression, and atonement is the purpose.
A miracle is a universal blessing from God through me to all my brothers. Explanation. You once said that souls cannot rest until everyone has found salvation. This happens to be true. It is the privilege of the forgiven to forgive. The disciples were officially and specifically told to heal others as physicians of the Lord. They were also told to heal themselves and were promised that I would never leave them or forsake them. Atonement is the natural profession of the children of God because they have professed me.
Aside, tell Bill that that is what professor really means. As an associative professor, he must become associated with my strength. As an assistant professor, you must assist both him and me. The children need both strength and help. You cannot help until you are strong. The everlasting arms are your strength, and the wisdom of God is your help.
Heaven and earth shall pass away means that they will not always exist as separate states. My word, which is the resurrection and the light, shall not pass away because life is eternal. You are the work of God, and his work is wholly lovable and wholly loving. This is how a man must think of himself in his heart, because this is what he is.
Add, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Urtext Manuscripts of A Course in Miracles, complete 7-volume combined edition, Volume 1, Chapter 1, Section B, The Relationship of Miracles and Revelation. Remember the point about miracles as a means of organizing different levels of consciousness. Miracles come from the below conscious, subconscious level. Revelations come from the above conscious level. The conscious level is in between and reacts to either sub or superconscious impulses in varying ratios. Freud was right about the classification, but not the names. He was also right that the content of consciousness is fleeting. Consciousness is the level which engages in the world and is capable of responding to both external and internal impulses, having no impulses from itself, and being primarily a mechanism for inducing response. It can be very wrong.
For example, if the identification is with the body, consciousness may distort superconscious impulses by denying their source and seeking their impact in the orgasm. This is the result of the mistaken identity confusion.
If you will look back at the description of the effects of revelation, you will see that there are some similarities in the experiential results, but hardly in the content. This and preceding paragraph go later.
Revelations induce complete but temporary suspension of doubt and fear. They represent the original form of communication between God and his souls, before the intrusion of fire and ice made this possible. Revelations induce complete but temporary suspension of doubt and fear. They represent the original form of communication between God and his souls, before the intrusion of fire and ice made this impossible. It should be noted that they involve an extremely personal sense of closeness to creation, which man tries to find in sexual relationships. This confusion is responsible for the depression and fear which are often associated with sex.
Sex is often associated with the lack of love, but the revelation is purely a love experience. Physical closeness cannot achieve this. As was said before, the subconscious impulses properly induce miracles, which are interpersonal and result in closeness to others. This can be misunderstood by a personally willful consciousness as an impulse toward sexual gratification.
The revelation unites souls directly with God.
The miracle unites souls directly with each other. Neither emanates from consciousness, but both are experienced there. This is essential because consciousness is the state which produces action, though it does not inspire it.
Man is free to believe what he chooses. What he does attests to what he believes.
The deeper levels of his subconscious always contain the impulse to miracles, but he is free to fill its superficial levels, which are closer to consciousness, with the impulses of this world and to identify himself with them. This results in denying himself access to the miracle level underneath. In conscious actions, then, his interpersonal relationships also become superficial, and miracle-inspired relating becomes impossible.
Miracles are a way of earning release from fear.
Revelation induces a state in which fear has already been abolished. Miracles thus are a means, and revelations are an end. In this sense, they work together.
Tell Bill that miracles do not depend on revelation. They induce it. He is quite capable of miracles already, but he is still too fearful for revelations.
Note that your, Helen, revelation occurred specifically after you had engaged at the visionary level in a process of denying fear.
Revelation is intensely personal and is actually not translatable into conscious content at all. That is why any attempt to describe it in words is usually incomprehensible, even to the writer himself at another time. This is why the Book of Revelations is essentially incomprehensible. Revelation induces only experience. Miracles, on the other hand, induce interpersonal action. In the end, these are more useful because of their impersonal nature.
In this phase of learning, working miracles is more valuable because freedom from fear cannot be thrust upon you. The experience cannot last.
Tell Bill that your propensity for revelations, which is very great, is the result of a high level of past communion. Its transitory nature comes from the descent into fear, which has not yet been overcome. His own suspended state mitigates both extremes. This has been very apparent in the course of both of your recent developmental patterns.
Miracles are the essential course of action for both of you. They will strengthen him and stabilize you.
Note that the much more personal than usual notes you are taking today reflect the revelatory experience. This does not produce the more generalizable quality which this course is aimed at. They may, nevertheless, be of great help to Bill. Personally, since you asked for something that would help him personally. It depends on how he listens and how well he understands the cooperative nature of your joint experience. You can help only by reading this note first. Ask him later if this should be included in the written part of the course at all, or whether you should keep these notes separately. He is in charge of these decisions.
Tell Bill he should try to understand the very important difference between Christ's control and Christ's guidance. This is what made him fearful yesterday.
Miracles praise God through men. They praise God by honoring his creations, affirming their perfection. They heal because they deny body identification and affirm soul identification. By perceiving the spirit, they adjust the levels and see them in proper alignment. This places the spirit at the center, where souls can communicate directly.
Miracles should inspire gratitude, not awe. Man should thank God for what he really is. The children of God are very holy. The miracle honors their holiness.
God's creations cannot lose their holiness, although it can be hidden. The miracle uncovers it and brings it into the light where it belongs.
Holiness can never be really hidden in darkness, but man can deceive himself on this point. This illusion makes him fearful because in his heart he knows it is an illusion. Like all illusions, he exerts enormous efforts to establish their validity. The miracle sets validity where it belongs. Eternal validity belongs only to the soul. The miracle acknowledges only the truth. It thus dispels man's illusions about himself and puts him into communion with himself and with God.
Christ inspires all miracles, which are essentially intercessions. They intercede for man's holiness and make him holy. They place man beyond the physical laws and raise him into the sphere of celestial order. In this order, man is perfect.
The soul never loses its communion with God. Only the mind and the body need at-one-ment. The miracle joins in the at-one-ment of Christ by placing the mind in the service of the Spirit. This establishes the proper function of mind and abolishes its errors.
Miracles honor man because he is lovable. They dispel illusions about himself and perceive the light in him. They thus atone for his errors by freeing him from his own nightmares. They release him from a prison in which he has imprisoned himself. They release him from a prison in which he has imprisoned himself. By freeing his mind from illusions, they restore his sanity and place him at the feet of Jesus.
Biblical quotation regarding healing of devil-possessed man, in which the sufferer was subsequently found healed in his right mind and sitting at the feet of Jesus.
Tell Bill man's mind can be possessed by illusions, but his spirit is eternally free. If a mind creates without love, it can create an empty shell. This can be possessed by evil. But the atonement restores the soul to its proper place. Unless there is emptiness, there is no danger, and emptiness is a false creation. The mind that serves the spirit is invulnerable.
The miracle restores the soul to its fullness. By atoning for lack, it establishes perfect protection. The strength of the soul leaves no room for intrusions. The forgiven are filled with the soul, and their soul forgives in return. It is the duty of the released to release their brothers.
The forgiven are the means of atonement. Those released by Christ must join in releasing their brothers, for this is the plan of atonement.
Miracles are the way in which minds that serve the Spirit unite with Christ for the salvation or release of all God's creations.
Aside, Helen commented on awakening with the phrase, God is not mocked, with anticipation of punishment.
Interpretation, God is not mocked, was intended as reassurance. You are afraid that what you wrote last night was contradictory, conflicting with some earlier points, especially because you were writing while you were all doped up. Remember, God is not mocked under any circumstances.
Contradictions in my word mean lack of understanding or scribal failures, which I make every effort to correct. But they are still not crucial. The Bible has the same problem, I assure you, and it's still being edited. Consider the power of my word in that it has withstood all the attacks of error and is the source of truth.
Tell Bill that there are certain advantages. Tell Bill that there are certain advantages in being a psychologist. A major one is the understanding of projection and the extent of its results. Possession is very closely related to projection. Lucifer could be literally translated light bearer. He literally projected himself from heaven. Projection still has this hurling connotation because it involves hurling something you don't want and regard as dangerous and frightening to someone else. This is the opposite of the golden rule, and having placed this rule upside down, the reverse of miracles or projection follows automatically.
The correction lies in accepting what is true in yourself by bringing all that you are into light. Helen fearful of writing next part. Casey was wrong about possession, and he was also wrong about hurting himself. One of the major problems with miracle workers is that they are so sure that what they are doing is right because they know it stems from love, that they do not pause to let me establish my limits.
While he, Casey, came from me, he could not be included to ask me each time whether I wanted him to perform this particular miracle. If he had, he would not have performed any miracles that could not get through constructively, and would thus have saved himself unnecessary strain. He burned himself out with indiscriminate miracles, and to this extent did not fulfill his own full purpose, and was also subject to the scribal error I mentioned at the start. The disciples were also prone to this.
The answer is never perform a miracle without asking me if you should. This spares you from exhaustion, and because you act under direct communication, the trance becomes unnecessary. Because miracles are expressions of love, it does not follow that they will always be effective. I am the only one who can perform miracles indiscriminately because I am the atonement. You have a role in the atonement, which I will dictate to you.
Remember, you already have a point about the involuntary nature of miracles. We also have established the fact that everything involuntary belongs under Christ's control, not under yours. Under Christ's control, miracles replenish the doer as well as the receiver.
Possession really means not under Christ's control, thus making him, the mind, vulnerable to projection. The references to the earthbound entering bodies really refer to the taking over by their own earthbound thoughts. This is demon possession. After all, Lucifer fell, but he was still an angel. He is thus the symbol for man. Atonement is the knowledge that the belief that angels can fall is false. It is true that mind can create projections as well as miracles, but it's not true that projections are real. Any psychologist should understand this. This is what is meant by the truth shall set you free.
Christ-controlled miracles are part of the atonement, but Christ's guidance is personal and leads to personal salvation. The impersonal nature of miracles is an essential ingredient because this enables me to control their distribution as I see fit.
Christ's guidance, on the other hand, leads to the highly personal experience of revelation. This is why it involves personal choice. A guide does not control by definition, but he does direct, leaving the following up to you. Lead us not into temptation means guide us out of our own errors. Note that the word is lead, not order.
Take up thy cross and follow me should be interpreted to read, recognize your errors and choose to abandon them by following my guidance.
Tell Bill when he is afraid of possession, he needs only remember that error cannot really threaten truth, which always can withstand its assaults. Only the error is really vulnerable. The princes of the world are princes only because they are really angels, but they are free to establish their kingdom where they see fit.
If you will remember that all princes inherit their power from the Father, the right choice becomes inevitable. The soul is in a state of grace forever. Man's reality is only his soul. Therefore, man is in a state of grace forever.
Atonement undoes all errors in this respect, and thus uproots the real source of fear. If you will check back at the reference to uprooting, you will understand it better in this context.
Tell Bill that whenever God's reassurance are experienced as threat, it is always because man is defending his misplaced and misdirected love and loyalty. That is what projection always involves.
Casting spells merely means affirming error, and error is lack of love. When man projects this onto others, he does imprison them, but only to the extent that he reinforces errors they have already made. This distortion makes them vulnerable to the curse of others, since they have already cursed themselves. The miracle worker can only bless, and this undoes the curse and frees the soul from prison.
Tell Bill that his slip-about rivet should be noted. Some slips reach consciousness from un-Christ-controlled subconscious and betray a lack of love.
But others' slips come from the superconscious, which is in communion with God. and which can also break into consciousness.
His slip rivet was an expression of a soul gaining enough strength to request freedom from prison. It will ultimately demand it.
Special revelation for Helen.
You are wholly lovely, a perfect shaft of pure light. Before your loveliness, the stars stand transfixed and bow to the power of your will.
What do children know of their creation except what their creator tells them?
You were created above the angels because your role involves creation as well as protection.
You who are in the image of the Father need bow only to him, before whom I kneel with you.
Note, this revelation was permitted because you did not project onto Bill the blame for your omission to ask me if you should transcribe the notes. The fact that he should have done so does not exempt you from your own omission.
Thanks for blessing him with a miracle rather than cursing him with projection.
Note further, he didn't feel concerned about it either, so he forgot. It happens all the time until the habit of asking becomes involuntary.
Helen meeting with Dr. Wise and Dr. Ramshap, Dr. D permitted an opportunity for questioning in his capacity as chairman of the flu board for asking regarding Bill's flu shot. This was an example of how miracles should work. You did not jump into the question yourself. And even though you did rush for the phone on Red's advice, you exerted no pressure on Bill's reluctance.
This gave me a chance to let you leave it to the real expert, whom I sent to answer the question.
Miracles are examples of right thinking. Reality contact at all levels becomes strong and accurate, thus permitting correct delineation of intra- and interpersonal boundaries. As a result, the doer sees the truth as God created it. This is what is meant by the point on perspective adjustment.
A miracle is a correction factor introduced into false thinking by me.
It acts as a catalyst, shaking up erroneous perception and snapping it into place. This correction factor places man under the atonement principle, where his perception is healed. Until this has occurred, perception of the divine order is impossible. True depth perception becomes possible only at the highest order of perceptual integration.
The spiritual eye is the mechanism of miracles because what the spiritual eye perceives is truth. The spiritual eye perceives both the creations of God and the creations of man. Among the creations of man, it can also separate the true from the false by its ability to perceive totally rather than selectively. It thus becomes the proper instrument for reality testing, which always involves the necessary distinction between the true and the false.
The miracle dissolves error because the spiritual eye identifies error as false or unreal. This is the same as saying that by seeing light, darkness automatically disappears.
Darkness is lack of light. It does not have unique properties of its own. It is an example of the scarcity fallacy from which only error can proceed.
Truth is always abundant. Those who perceive and acknowledge that they have everything they have no need for driven behavior of any kind. Helen has other personal material related to this regarding pregnancy.
Miracles are a blessing from parents to children. This is just another way of phrasing the previous point about from those who have more to those who have less. Children do not belong to parents, but they do need to share their greater abundance. If they are deprived, their perception becomes distorted. When this occurs, the whole family of God or the sonship is impaired in its relationships.
Ultimately, every member of the family of God must return. The miracle calls to him to return because it blesses and honors him even though he may be absent in spirit.
The miracle acknowledges all men as your brothers and mine. It is a way of perceiving the universal mark of God in them.
Tell Bill that this is the true strawberry mark of brotherhood. This is just a sign of special concern for him because he keeps worrying about this.
You might add that his idea about his own exclusion from universal love is fallacious in your terms and arrogant in his. His real specialness does not stem from exclusion, but from inclusion. All my brothers are special. They should stop interpreting this as all except B. This is ridiculous.
Tell him that the implied lack of love that his version contains is way off the mark and misses the level of right thinking entirely. He must heal his perception in this respect. He must work a miracle on behalf of himself here. See the point about miracles as a perception corrector before he can affect miracles or creative energizers, which they are.
Tell Bill that 50 million Frenchmen can be wrong because the notion is too fragmented. What can't be wrong is the universal sonship of which he is a part.
God would be mocked if any of his creations lacked holiness. The creation is whole. The mark of wholeness is holiness, not holes. The sonship has no holes anywhere.
Urtext Manuscripts of A Course in Miracles, Volume 1, Chapter 1, Section B, The Relationship of Miracles and Revelation, Part 2. God would be mocked if any of his creations lacked holiness. His creation is whole. The mark of holiness is holiness, not holes. The sonship has no holes anywhere.
Wholeness is the perpetual content of the miracle. It thus corrects or atones for the faulty perception of lack.
We now turn to the fundamental distinction between miracles and projection. The stimulus must precede the response and must also determine, influence the kind of response that is evoked. The relationship of S and R are extremely intimate. The behavioristic terminology is because this part deals with the behavior.
Behavior is response, so that the question response to what becomes crucial.
Stimuli of all kinds are identified through perception. You perceive the stimulus and behave accordingly. It follows then that as ye perceive, so will ye behave.
Helen raises point that biblical language is hardly behavioristic terminology. Answer, no, but they needn't be out of accord with each other either.
Consider the golden rule again. You are asked to behave toward others as you would have them behave toward you. This means that the perception of both must be accurate, since the golden rule is the order for appropriate behavior. You can't behave appropriately unless you perceive accurately, because appropriate behavior depends on lack of level confusion. The presence of level confusion always results in variable reality testing and hence variability in behavioral appropriateness.
All forms of self-image debasement are fundamental perceptual distortions. They inevitably produce either self-contempt or projection, and usually both.
Since you and your neighbor are equal members of the same family, as you perceive both, so will you behave toward both. The way to perceive for golden rule behavior is to look out from the perception of your own holiness and perceive the holiness of others.
Bill and you need considerable clarification of the channel role. Look carefully at Mrs. Albert. She is working miracles every day because she knows who she is. I emphasize again that your tendency to forget names is not hostility, but a fear of involvement, of recognition. You had misinterpreted human encounters as opportunities for magic rather than miracles, and so you tried to protect the name. This is a very ancient and primitive way of trying to protect a person.
Note the very old Jewish practice of changing the name of a person who is ill, so that when the list is given to the angel of death, the person with that name will not be found.
This is a good example of the curiously literal regression which can occur in very bright people when they become afraid. You and Bill both do it. Actually, it is a device closely related to the phobia, in the sense that they both narrow fear to a simple aspect of a much larger problem in order to enable them to avoid it.
A similar mechanism works when you get furious about a comparatively minor expression by someone to whom you are ambivalent. A good example of this is your response to Jonathan, who does leave things around in very strange ways. Actually, he does this because he thinks that by minor areas of disorganization, he can protect his stability. I remind you that you have done this yourself for years and should understand it very well. This should be met with great charity rather than with great fury.
The fury comes from your awareness that you do not love Jonathan as you should, and you narrow your lack of love by centering your hate on trivial behavior in an attempt to protect him from it. You also call him Jonathan for the same reason. See previous reference.
Note that a name is a human symbol that stands for a person. Superstition about names are very common for just that reason. That is also why people sometimes respond with anger when their names are spelled or pronounced incorrectly.
Actually, this Jewish superstition about changing the names was a distortion of a revelation about how to alter or avert death. What the revelation's proper content was that those who change their mind, not name, about destruction or hate do not need to die. Death is a human affirmation of a belief in hate. That is why the Bible says there is no death. And that is why I demonstrated that death does not exist. Remember that I came to fulfill the law by reinterpreting it. The law itself, if properly understood, offers only protection to man. Those who have not yet changed their minds have entered the hellfire concept into it.
Remember, I said before, because nature abhors a vacuum, it does not follow that the vacuum is filled with hellfire. The emptiness engendered by fear should be replaced by love, because love and its absence are in the same dimension. and correction cannot be undertaken except within a dimension. Otherwise, there has been a confusion of levels.
Returning to Mrs. Albert, not Andrews, she corrected your error about her name without embarrassment and without hostility, because she has not made your own mistake about names.
She is not afraid because she knows she is protected. She made the correction only because you were inaccurate, and the whole question of embarrassment did not occur to her.
She was also quite unembarrassed when she told you that everything has to be done to preserve life, because you never can tell when God may come and say, "Get up, Dave," and then he will.
She did not ask what you believed first and afterwards merely added, and it's true too. The right answer to the SCT item is, when they told me what to do, I referred the question to the only real authority.
Helen note, if you ask somebody what he believes before you tell him what you believe, then you are implying that you will say what he approves. This is not the real authority.
You took a lot of notes on those who are ashamed of me before men. Them will I be ashamed of before God. This was rather carefully clarified, even though the quotation is not quite right, but it doesn't matter.
The important thing is that elsewhere in the Bible, it also says, those who represent or plead for me to men will be represented or pleaded for by me before God. Note, this quotation is also not the correct biblical phrasing, but it is what it means. Note that one who represents also witnesses for. The quotation thus means that you represent or witness for the authority in whom you believe.
Your witnessing demonstrates your belief and thus strengthens it.
I assure you that I will witness for anyone who lets me, and to whatever extent he himself permits it.
Those who witness for me are expressing through their miracles that they have abandoned deprivation in favor of the abundance they have learned belongs to them.
A major contribution of miracles is their strength in releasing man from his misplaced sense of isolation, deprivation, and lack. They are affirmations of sonship, which is a state of completion and abundance.
Bill's very proper emphasis on changing your mind needs clarification.
Whatever is true and real is eternal and cannot change or be changed. The soul is therefore unalterable because it is already perfect. But the mind can elect the level it chooses to serve. The only limit which is put on its choice is that it cannot serve two masters.
While the ballot itself is a secret one, and the right to vote is fully protected, voting always entails both election and rejection. If two candidates are voted for the same position, the machine cancels the ballot automatically.
This is necessary because a split vote does not represent any real alliance.
Free will is the attribute of the mind, not the soul. The soul always remains changeless because it never leaves the side of God.
The creation of the soul is already fully accomplished. The mind, if it votes to do so, becomes a medium by which the soul can create along the line of its own creation. If it does not freely elect to do so, it retains this creative ability, but places itself under tyrannous rather than authoritative control. As a result, what it creates is imprisonment, because such are the dictates of tyrants.
To change your mind means to place it at the disposal of true authority. The miracle is thus a sign that the mind has elected to be guided by Christ in his service. The abundance of Christ is the natural result of choosing to follow him.
P.S. The reason you have been late recently for work because you were taking dictation is merely because you didn't remember to ask me when to stop. This is an example of the indiscriminate or uncontrolled miracle working we already spoke of. It is well meant but ill advised.
I prompted that call from Jack, taximan, couldn't pick Helen up, to show you that this is not necessary. Also, the other man needed the money more today.
Note that you managed to fill your scribal role with no interruptions and were also on time.
Note also that you closed the book and put it aside without consulting me. Ask, is that all? Answer, no. Add the following. These notes are serving, among other things, to replace the handwriting on the wall, which you once saw next to your own altar, which read, "You have been weighed in the balance and found wanting."
Scribes must learn Christ's control to replace their former habits, which did produce scarcity rather than abundance. From errors of this kind, the sense of deprivation is inevitable, but very easily corrected.
The following is in relation to question about sex. Tell Bill the one more river is related to sex. You might even explain it to him as a tidal wave, a term which he will understand. You won't.
Both of you are involved with unconscious distortions above the miracle level, which are producing a dense cover over miracle impulses, which makes it hard for them to reach consciousness. Sex and miracles are both ways of relating. The nature of any interpersonal relationship is limited or defined by what you want it to do, which is why you want it in the first place. Relating is a way of achieving an outcome.
Indiscriminate sexual impulses resemble indiscriminate miracle impulses in that both result in body image misperceptions. The first is an expression of an indiscriminate attempt to reach communion through the body. This involves not only the improper self-identification, but also disrespect for the individuality of others. Self-control is not the whole answer to this problem, though I am by no means discouraging its use. It must be understood, however, that the underlying mechanism must be uprooted, a word you both should understand well enough by now not to regard it as frightening.
All shallow roots have to be uprooted because they are not deep enough to sustain you. The illusion that shallow roots can be deepened and thus made to hold is one of the corollaries on which the reversal of the golden rule referred to twice before is balanced. As these false underpinnings are uprooted or given up, equilibrium is experienced as unstable. But the fact is that nothing is less stable than an orientation which is upside down. Anything that holds it this way is hardly conducive to greater stability.
The whole danger of defenses lies in their propensity to hold misperceptions rigidly in place. This is why rigidity is regarded as stability by those who are off the mark.
Note, the only final solution, no, Helen, this has nothing to do with Nazi use of the term. You just got frightened again. One of the more horrible examples of inverted or upside down thinking, and history is full of horrible examples of this, is the fact that the Nazis spelled their appalling error with capital letters. I shed many tears over this, but it is by no means the only time I have said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do.
All actions which stem from reverse thinking are literally the behavioral expressions of those who know not what they do. Actually, Jean Dixon was right in her emphasis on feet on the ground and fingertips in the heaven, though she was a bit too literal for your kind of understanding. Many people knew exactly what she meant, so her statement was the right miracle for them.
For you and Bill, it would be better to consider the concept in terms of reliability and validity. A rigid orientation can be extremely reliable, even if it is upside down. In fact, the more consistently upside down it is, the more reliable it is, because consistency always held up better mathematically than test, retest comparisons, which were always on shaky ground. You can check this against Jack's notes if you wish, but I assure you that it's true. Split half reliability is statistically a much stronger approach. The reason for this is that correlation, which is the technique applied to test-retest comparisons, measures only the extent of association and does not consider the direction at all.
But two halves of the same thing must go in the same direction if there is to be accuracy of measurement. This simple statement is really the principle on which split half reliability, a means of estimating internal consistency, rests.
Note, however, that both approaches leave out a very important dimension. Internal consistency criteria disregard time because the focus is on one-time measurements. Test-retest comparisons are based on our time intervals, but they disregard direction.
It is possible, of course, to use both by establishing internal consistency and stability over time. You will remember that Jack once told his class that the more sophisticated statisticians are concentrating more and more on reliability rather than validity. The rationale for this, as he said, was that a reliable instrument does measure something. He also said, however, that validity is still the ultimate goal, which reliability can only serve.
I submit, I'm using Jack's language in this section because it always had a special meaning for you, so did Jack. Your confusion of sex and statistics is an interesting example of this whole issue. Note that night you spent in the scent of roses doing a complex factorial analysis of convariance. It's a funny story to others because they see a different kind of level confusion than the one you yourself were making. You might recall that you wanted that design and Jack opposed it. One of the real reasons why that evening was so exhilarating was because it represented a battle of intellects, both good ones, by the way, each communicating exceptionally clearly, but on opposite sides. The sexual aspects were naturally touched off in both of you because of the sex and aggression confusion.
It is especially interesting that after the battle ended on the note of compromise, with your agreeing with Jack, he wrote in the margins of your notes, "Virtue is triumphant." Helen notes regarding submission, dominance, feminine, masculine roles entered into this. While this remark was funny to both of you at the time, you might consider its truer side. The virtue lay in the complete respect each other of you offered to the other's intellect. Your mutual sexual attraction was also shared. The error lay in the word triumphant. This had the battle connotation, because neither of you was respecting all of the other. There was a great deal more to a person than intellect and genitals. The omission was the soul.
I submit, after long interruption, that if a mind, soul, is in valid relationship with God, it can't be upside down. Jack and the other very eminent methodologists have abandoned validity in favor of reliability because they have lost sight of the end and are concentrating on the means.
Remember the story about the artist who kept devoting himself to inventing better and better ways to sharpening pencils. He never created anything, but he had the sharpest pencils in town. The language here is international. Sex is often utilized on behalf of very similar errors. Hostility, triumph, vengeance, self-debasement, and all sorts of expressions of the lack of love are often very clearly seen in the accompanying fantasies. But it is a profound error to imagine that, because these fantasies are so frequent or occur so reliably that this implies validity. Remember that while validity implies reliability, the relationship is not reversible. You can be wholly reliable and entirely wrong.
While a reliable test does measure something, what use is the test unless you discover what the something is? And if validity is more important than reliability and is also necessarily implied by it, why not concentrate on validity and let reliability fall naturally into place?
Intellect may be a displacement upward, but sex can be a displacement outward. How can man come close to others through the parts of him which are really invisible? The word invisible means cannot be seen or perceived. What cannot be perceived is hardly the right means for improving perception.
The confusion of miracle impulse with sexual impulse is a major source of perceptual distortion because it induces rather than straightening out the basic level confusion which underlies all those who seek happiness with the instruments of the world. A desert is a desert is a desert. You can do anything you want in it, but you cannot change it from what it is. It still lacks water, which is why it is a desert. Bring up that dream about the bluebird. While Helen was looking for this dream, she came across another. The message was to bring both as an excellent example of how extremely good Helen had become over the intervening 25 years at sharpening pencils. Note that the essential content hasn't changed, it's just better written. The thing to do with a desert is to leave.
Miracles arise from a miraculous state of mind. By being one, the state of mind goes out to anyone, even without the awareness of the miracle worker himself. The impersonal nature of miracles is because atonement itself is one, uniting all creations with their creator.
The miracle is an expression of an inner awareness of Christ and acceptance of his atonement. The mind is then in a state of grace and naturally becomes gracious, both to the host within and the stranger without. By bringing in the stranger, he becomes your brother.
The miracles you are told not to perform have not lost their value. They are still expressions of your own state of grace, but the action aspect of the miracle should be Christ-controlled because of his complete awareness of the whole plan. The impersonal nature of miracle-mindedness ensures your own grace, but only Christ in a position to know where grace can be bestowed.
A miracle is never lost. It touches many people you may not even know, and sometimes produces undreamed of changes in forces of which you're not even aware. This is not your concern. It will always bless you. This is not your concern either, but it is the concern of the record. The record is completely unconcerned with reliability being perfectly valid because of the way it was set up. It always measures what it was supposed to measure.
I want to finish the instructions about sex because this is an area the miracle worker must understand.
Inappropriate sex drives or misdirected miracle impulses result in guilt if expressed and depression if denied. We said before that all real pleasure comes from doing God's will. Whenever it is not done, an experience of lack results. This is because not doing the will of God is a lack of self.
Sex was intended as an instrument for physical creation to enable souls to embark on new chapters in their experience and thus improve their record. The pencil was not an end in itself, see earlier section. It was an aid to the artist in his own creative endeavors. As he made new homes for souls and guided them through the period of their own developmental readiness, he learned the role of the Father himself. The whole process was set up as a learning experience in gaining grace.
The pleasure which is derived from sex as such is reliable only because it stems from an error which man shared. Awareness of the error produces the guilt. Denial of the error results in projection. Correction of the error brings release.
The only valid use of sex is procreation. It is not truly pleasurable in itself. Lead us not into temptation means do not let us deceive ourselves into believing that we can relate in peace to God or to our brothers with anything external.
The sin of Onan was called a sin because it involved a related type of self-delusion, namely that pleasure without relating can exist.
To repeat an earlier instruction, the concept of either the self or another as a sex object epitomizes this strange reversal. As Bill put it, and very correctly too, it is objectionable, but only because it is invalid. Upside-down logic produces this kind of thinking.
Child of God, you were created to create the good, the beautiful, and the holy. Do not lose sight of this. You were right in telling Bill to invite me to enter anywhere temptation arises. I will change the situation from one of inappropriate sexual attraction to one of impersonal miracle working. The concept of changing the channel for libidinal expression is Freud's greatest contribution, except that he did not understand what channel really means.
The love of God for a little while must be expressed through one body to another. That is because the real vision is still too dim, so dim. Everyone can use his body best by enlarging man's perception, and so he can see the real vision. This vision is invisible to the physical eye. The ultimate purpose of the body is to render itself unnecessary. Learning to do this is the only real reason for its creation.
Note, scribes have a particular role in the plan of atonement because they have the ability to experience revelations themselves and also to put into words enough of the experience to serve as a basis for miracles.
This refers to experiences at a visionary level. After which Helen wrote, "If you will tell me what to do, I will do it." She had not known that the word "to" was inserted and had merely intended to write, "I will do it." This recognition had a terrific impact on Helen.
This is why you experienced that revelation about "I will to do" very personally, but also wrote it. What you wrote can be useful to miracle workers other than yourself. We said before that prayer is the medium of miracles. The miracle prayer is what you wrote, i.e., if you will tell me what to do, I will do it.
This prayer is the door that leads out of the desert forever.
Correction next day. This is not a complete statement because it does not exclude the negative. We have already told you to add "and not to do what you would not have me do" in connection with miracles. The distinction has also been made here between miracle-mindedness as a state and miracle doing as its expression.
The former needs your careful protection because it is a state of miracle readiness. This is what the Bible means in the many references to "hold yourself ready" and other similar injunctions.
Readiness here means keep your perception right side up or valid, so you will always be ready, willing, and able. These are the essentials for listen, learn, and do. You must be ready to listen, willing to learn, and able to do.
Only the last is involuntary because it is the application of miracles which must be Christ-controlled. But the other two, which are voluntary aspects of miracle-mindedness, are up to you.
To channelize does have a narrowing down connotation, though not in the sense of lack. The underlying state of mind or grace is a total commitment. Only the doing aspect involves the channel at all. This is because doing is always specific.
As Jack said, a reliable instrument must measure something, but a channel is also valid. It must learn to do only what it's supposed to do. Change the prayer to read, "If you will tell me what to do, only that I will to do."
Note, Helen objects to doggerel sound of this and regards it as very inferior poetry. Answer, it's hard to forget though.
The revelation is literally unspeakable because it is an experience of unspeakable love. The word "are" should be served only for revelations to which it is perfect and correctly applicable. It is not appropriately applied to miracles because a state of true awe is worshipful. It implies that one of a lesser order stands before the greater one. This is the case only when a soul stands before his creator. Souls are perfect creations and should be struck with awe in the presence of the creator of perfection.
The miracle, on the other hand, is a sign of love among equals. Equals cannot be in awe of each other because awe always implies inequality. Awe is not properly experienced even to me. That is why that short introductory vision, I knelt beside you, facing the light.
An elder brother is entitled to respect for his greater experience and a reasonable amount of obedience for his greater wisdom. He's also entitled to love because he is a brother, and also to devotion if he is devoted. It is only my own devotion that entitles me to yours. But you will notice that I have knelt at your altar as readily as I could ever have you kneel at mine.
There is nothing about me that you cannot attain. I have nothing that does not come from God. The main difference between us as yet is that I have nothing else. This leaves me in a state of true holiness, which is only a potential in you.
No man cometh to the Father but by me is among the most misunderstood statements in the Bible. It does not mean that I am in any way separate or different from you, except in time. Now we know that time does not exist. Actually, the statement is much more meaningful if it is considered on a vertical rather than a horizontal axis. Regarded along the vertical, man stands below me and I stand below God. In the process of rising up, I am higher. This is because without me, the distance between God and man is too great for man to encompass. I bridge the distance as an elder brother to man, on the other hand, and a son of God on the other. My devotion to my brothers has placed me in charge of the sonship, which I can render completely only to the extent I can share it.
This appears to contradict another statement. I and my Father are one. It doesn't. There are still separate parts in the statement in recognition of the fact that the Father is greater. Actually, the original statement was, are of one kind.
The Holy Spirit is the bringer of revelations, not miracles. Revelations are indirectly inspired by me because I am close to the Holy Spirit and alert to revelation readiness in my brothers. I can thus bring down to them more than they can draw down to themselves. Jean Dixon's description is perhaps a better statement of my position. Because my feet are on the ground and my hands are in heaven, I can bring down the glories of heaven to my brothers on earth.
The Holy Spirit is the highest communication medium. Miracles do not involve this type of communication because they are temporary communication devices. When man can return to his original form of communication with God by direct revelation, the need for miracles is over. The Holy Spirit mediates higher to lower order communication, keeping the direct channel from God to man open for revelation. Revelation is not reciprocal. It is always from God to man. This is because God and man are not equal. The miracle is reciprocal because it always involves equality.
In the longitudinal or horizontal plane, the true equality of all men in the sonship appears to involve almost endless time. But we know that time is only an artifact introduced as a learning aid.
The miracle is a learning device which lessens the need for time. The sudden shift from horizontal to vertical perception, which the miracle entails, introduces an interval from which the doer and the receiver both emerge further, much further along in time than they would otherwise have been.
A miracle has thus the unique property of abolishing time by rendering the space of time it occupies unnecessary. There is no relation between the time a miracle takes and the time it covers. It substitutes for learning that might have taken thousands of years. It does this by the underlying recognition of perfect equality and holiness between doer and receiver, on which the miracle rests. It is unstable but perfectly consistent. That is, it does not occur predictably across time, and it rarely occurs in comparable forms, but within itself, it is perfectly consistent, since it contains nothing but an acknowledgement of equality and worth. All parts are equal. This establishes the prerequisite for validity.
We said before that the miracle abolishes time. It does this by a process of collapsing it. It thus abolishes certain intervals within it. It does this, however, within the larger temporal sequence.
The validity of the miracle, then, is predictive, not logical, within the temporal schema. It establishes an out-of-pattern time interval, which is not under the usual laws of time. Only in this sense it is timeless. By collapsing time, it literally saves time, much the way daylight saving time does. It rearranges the distribution of light.
The miracle is the only device which man has at his immediate disposal for controlling time. Only the revelation transcends it, having nothing to do with time at all. The miracle is much like the body in that both are learning aids which aim at facilitating a state in which they are unnecessary. When the soul is finally in the original state of direct communication, neither the body nor the miracles serve any purpose.
While he is in the body, however, man can choose between loveless and miraculous channels of creativity. He can create an empty shell, see previous reference, but he does not create nothing at all. He can wait, delay, paralyze himself. Reduces creativity to almost nothing and even introduce a real developmental arrest or regression. But he cannot abolish his creativity. He can destroy his medium of communication, but not his potential.
He was not created by his own free will. Only that he creates is his to decide. The basic decision of what the miracle-minded is not to wait on time any longer than is necessary. Time can waste as well as be wasted. The miracle worker, therefore, accepts the time control factor of the miracle gladly, because he knows that every collapse of time brings all men closer to the ultimate release from time, in which the Son and the Father are one.
The real meaning are of one kind is of one mind or will. When the will of the Sonship and the Father are one, their perfect accord is heaven.
Aside, tell Bill he is right in providing you with the consistent strength you need to get and he needs to offer. Your instability and his weakness have resulted from bad karmic choices, and your relationship now is crucial for the future. You must both exert every effort to restore it to what it once was. Both of you are correcting where you have failed before. This has already enabled you to fulfill a very unexpected role in your own joint salvation, and the salvation of many other children I will entrust increasingly to you. They are by no means chosen at random. Bill should know that his preparation is not only in terms of sharing in the results of your better application of some rather unusual talents. His own role, which he will understand after his preparation is complete, will be equally surprising. He will need your help then, as you need his strength now.
Note that you do not need his help as a scribe because you developed this ability by your own efforts and finally placed them at my disposal. By lending you his strength, he strengthens himself. When he gains this through his own efforts, he will need your help in a very unexpected way. But this is just another example of the reciprocal nature of miracles.
Equality does not imply homogeneity now. When everyone has everything, individual contributions to the sonship will no longer be necessary. When the atonement has been completed, all talents will be shared by all sons of God. God is not partial. All of his children have his total love, and all of his gifts are given freely to everyone alike.
Except you become as little children means unless you fully recognize your complete dependence on God, you cannot know the real power of the Son in his true relationship with the Father.
You and Bill do have special talents which are needed for the celestial speed up at this time. But note that the term speed up is not one which relates to the transcending of time.
When time is abolished and all of the sons of God have come home, no special agents will be necessary. But do not underestimate the power of special agents now, or the great need there is for them. I do not claim to be more than that myself. No one in his right mind, a term which should be especially noted, ever wants either more or less than that. Those who are called on to witness for me now are witnessing for all men, as I am.
The role of the priestess was one to experience revelations and to work miracles. The purpose was to bring those not yet available for direct revelations into proper focus for them. Heightened perception was always the essential priestess attribute.
This is the first time that Helen ever said that she would be honored if there were any no's.
Neither Bill nor I is really clear about how sexual impulses can be directly translated into miracle impulses. The fantasies that I mentioned yesterday, refer to discussion Helen and Bill had, provide an excellent example of how you switch. Now switch the pronoun references or it will be too confusing.
Fantasies are distorted forms of thinking because they always involve twisting perception into unreality. Fantasies is a debased form of vision. Visions and revelations are closely related. Fantasies and projection are more closely associated because both attempt to control external reality according to false internal needs. Live and let live happens to be a very meaningful injunction. Twist reality in any way and you are perceiving destructively. Reality was lost through usurpation, which in turn produces tyranny. I told you you were now restored to your former role in the plan of atonement, but you must still choose freely to devote your heritage to a greater restoration. As long as a single slave remains to walk the earth, your release is not complete. Complete restoration of the sonship is the only goal of the miracle-minded. A Course in Miracles, Urtext Manuscripts, completes 7-volume combined edition, Volume 1, Chapter 1, The Relationship of Miracles and Revelation, Part 3. Sexual fantasies are distortions of perception by definition. They are means of making false associations and obtaining pleasure from them. Man can do this only because he is creative. But although he can perceive false associations, he can never make them real except to himself. As was said before, man believes in what he creates. If he creates a miracle, he will be equally strong in his belief in that. The strength of his conviction will then sustain the belief of the miracle receiver.
No fantasies, sexual or otherwise, are true. Fantasies become totally unnecessary as the wholly satisfying nature of reality becomes apparent. The sex impulse is a miracle impulse when it is in proper focus. One individual sees in another the right partner for procreating the stock. Wolf was not too far off here. And also for their joint establishment of a creative home. This does not involve fantasy at all. If I am asked to participate in the decision will be a right one too.
In a situation where you or another person, or both, experience inappropriate sex impulses, know first that this is an expression of fear. Your love toward each other is not perfect, and this is why the fear arose. Turn immediately to me by denying the power of the fear and ask me to help you to replace it with love. This shifts the sexual impulse immediately to the miracle impulse and places it at my disposal.
Then, acknowledging the true creative worth of both yourself and the other one, this places strength where it belongs. Note that sexual fantasies are always destructive or depleting, in that they perceive another in an inappropriate creative role. Both people are perceived essentially as objects fulfilling their own pleasure drives. This dehumanized view is the source of the depleting use of sex. Freud's description is purely negative, i.e., as a release from the unpleasant. He also observed that the tension from id impulses never completely abates.
What he should have said is that the shift from miracle impulses to sexual impulses was debilitating in the first place, because of the level confusion involved. This set up a state in which real release was impossible. Note also that Freud's notion of sex was as a device for inducing relaxation, which he confused with peace.
Inappropriate sex relaxes only in the sense that it may induce physical sleep. The miracle, on the other hand, is an energizer. It always strengthens and never depletes. It does induce peace, and by establishing tranquility, not relaxation, it enables both giver and receiver to enter into a state of grace. Here his miracle-mindedness, not released from tension, is restored.
Tension is the result of building up of unexpressed miracle impulses. This can be truly abated only by releasing the miracle drive which has been blocked. Converting it to sexual libido merely produces further blocking. Never foster disillusion in yourself or encourage it in others. An object is incapable of release, because it is a concept which is deprived of creative power. The recognition of the real creative power in yourself and others brings release because it brings peace.
The peace of God, which passeth understanding, can keep your hearts now and forever.
There are only two short additions needed here. One, your earlier acute problem in writing things down came from a much earlier misuse of very great scribal abilities. These were turned to secret rather than shared advantages, depriving it of its miraculous potential and diverting it into possession. This is much like the confusion of sex impulses with possession impulses. Some of the original material is still in the temple. This is why you became so afraid about Atlantis. Bill has his own reasons.
Retain your miracle-minded attitude toward Rosie very carefully. She once hurt both of you, which is why she is now your servant. But she is blessed in that she sees service as a source of joy. Help her straighten out her past errors by contributing to your welfare now.
Special revelation regarding Helen on Mission 1. Helen's question regarding past memories. Answer. As long as you remember always that you were never suffered anything because of anything that anyone else did, this is not dangerous.
Remember that you who want peace can find it only by complete forgiveness. You never really wanted peace before, so there was no point in knowing how to get it. This is an example of the need to know principle, which was established by the Plan of Atonement long before CIA.
No kind of knowledge is acquired by anyone unless he wants it or believes in some way that he needs it. A psychologist does not need a lesson in the hierarchy of needs as such, but like everyone else, he does need to understand his own.
This particular set of notes will be the only one which deals with the concept of lack. Because while the concept does not exist in the creation of God, it is very apparent in the creations of man. It is, in fact, the essential difference.
A need implies lack by definition. It involves the recognition, conscious or unconscious, and at times fortunately superconscious, that you would be better off in a state which is somehow different from the one you are in.
Until the separation, which is a better term than the fall, nothing was lacking. This meant that man had no needs at all. If he had not deprived himself, he would never have experienced them.
After the separation, needs became the most powerful source of motivation for human action. All behavior is essentially motivated by needs, but behavior itself is not a divine attribute. The body is the mechanism for behavior. Ask any behaviorist, and he's right, too.
You tell your own classes that nobody would bother even to get up and go from one place to another if he did not think he would somehow be better off. This is very true.
Believing that he could be better off is the reason why man has the mechanism for behavior at his disposal. This is why the Bible says, "By their deeds ye shall know them."
A man acts according to the particular hierarchy of needs he establishes for himself. His hierarchy, in turn, depends on his perception of what he is, i.e., what he lacks. This establishes his own rules for what he needs to know.
Separation from God is the only lack he really needs to correct. But his separation would never have occurred if he had not distorted his perception of truth and thus perceived himself as lacking.
The concept of any sort of need hierarchy arose because, having made this fundamental error, he had already fragmented himself into levels with different needs. As he integrates, he becomes one, and his one need becomes one accordingly. Only the fragmented can be confused about this.
Internal integration with the self will not suffice to correct the lack fallacy, but it will correct the need fallacy. Thank you for writing this as given. Unified need produces unified action, because it produces lack of ambivalence.
The concept of need hierarchy, a corollary of the original error, requires correction at its own level, before the error of levels itself can be corrected. Man cannot operate or behave effectively while he operates at split levels. But as long as he does so, he must introduce correction from the bottom up.
This is because he now operates in space where up and down are meaningful terms. Ultimately, of course, space is as meaningless as time. The concept is really one of space-time belief. The physical world exists only because man can use it to correct his unbelief, which placed him in it originally. As long as man knew he did not need anything, the whole device was unnecessary.
The need to know is not safely under man's control at this time. It is much better off under mine. Let's just leave it at that.
Specific question raised by WT regarding sex under existing conditions. Helen raised previous question about the past, which has just been answered.
The other question, however, I am more than willing to answer because it is appropriate for now. You and Bill both chose your present sex partners shamefully and would have to atone for the lack of love which was involved in any case.
You selected them precisely because they were not suited to gratify your fantasies. This was not because you wanted to abandon or give up the fantasies, but because you were afraid of them. You saw in your partners a means of protecting against the fear, but both of you continued to look around for chances to indulge the fantasies.
The dream of the perfect partner is an attempt to find external integration while retaining conflicting needs in the self.
Bill was somewhat less guilty of this than you, but largely because he was more afraid. He had abandoned the hope of finding a perfect partner in a neurotic sense of despair of finding it. You, on the other hand, insisted that the hope was justified. Neither of you, therefore, was in your right mind.
As was said before, homosexuality is inherently more risky or error-prone than heterosexuality, but both can be undertaken on an equally false basis. The falseness of the basis is clear in the accompanying fantasies. Homosexuality always involves misperception of the self or the partner, and generally both.
Penetration does not involve magic, nor does any form of sexual behavior. It is a magic belief to engage in any form of body image activity at all. You neither create created yourselves, nor controlled your creations. By introducing levels into your own perception, you open the way for body image distortions.
The lack of love or faulty need orientation, which led to your particular person, not object, choices, can be corrected within the existent framework and would have to be in the larger interest of overall progress. The situation is questionable largely because of its inherent vulnerability to fantasy gratification. Doing the best you can within this limitation is probably the best corrective measurement at present. Any relationship you have undertaken for whatever reasons becomes a responsibility.
If you shift your own needs, some amount of corresponding shift in the need orientation of the other person must result. This will be beneficial, even if the partner was originally attracted to you because of your disrespect. Teaching devices are totally alien to a learner's perceptual system, are usually merely disruptive. Transfer depends on some common elements in the new situation which are understandable in terms of the old.
Man can never control the effects of fear himself because he has created fear and believes in what he creates. In attitude, then, though not in content, he resembles his own creator, who has perfect faith in his creations because he created them. All creation rests on belief, and the belief in the creation produces its existence. This is why it is impossible for a man to believe what is not true for anyone else. It is true for him because it is made by him.
Every aspect of fear proceeds from upside-down perception. The truly creative devote their efforts to correcting this. The neurotic devotes his to compromise. The psychotic tries to escape by establishing the truth of his own errors. It is most difficult to free him by ordinary means, only because he is more stable in his denial of truth.
The miracle makes no distinction among degrees of misperception. It is a device for perception correction, which is effective quite apart from either the degree or the direction of the error. This is its true indiscriminateness.
Christ-controlled miracles are selective only in that they are directed toward those who can use them for themselves. Since this makes it inevitable that they will extend them to others, a very strong chain of atonement is welded. But Christ control takes no account at all of the magnitude of the miracle itself, because the concept of size exists only in a plane that is itself unreal. Since the miracle aims at restoring reality, it would hardly be useful if it were bound by the laws of the same error it aims to correct. Only man makes that kind of error. It is an example of the foolish consistency his own false beliefs have engendered.
Both the power and the strength of man's creative will must be understood before the real meaning of denial can be appreciated and abolished. Denial is not mere negation. It is a positive miscreation. While the miscreation is necessarily believed in by its own creator, it does not exist at all at the level of true creation.
The miracle compares the creations of man with the higher level of creation, accepting what is in accord as true, and rejecting the discordant as false. This is why it is so closely associated with validity. Real validity is both true and useful, or better, it is useful because it is true.
All aspects of fear are untrue because they do not exist at the higher creative levels and therefore do not exist at all. To whatever extent a man is willing to submit his beliefs to the real test of validity, to that extent are his perceptions healed or corrected.
In sorting out the false from the true, the miracle proceeds much along the lines suggested very correctly by Bill. That is, if perfect love casts out fear, and if fear exists, then there is not perfect love. But only perfect love really exists.
Therefore, if there is fear, it creates a state which does not exist. Believe this and you will be free. Only God can establish this solution, for this faith is his gift.
A Course in Miracles, Urtext Manuscripts, completes 7-volume combined edition, Volume 1, Chapter 1, Part C, Distortions of Miracle Impulses. Man must contribute to his readiness, here as elsewhere. The readiness for faith, as for everything else that is true, entails the 2 steps necessary for the release from fear.
Denial of fear in human terms is a strong defense because it entails 2 levels of error. 1, that truth can be denied, and 2, the absence of truth can be effective.
Experiencing fear, which is more characteristic of Bill, involves only the second error. However, these differences do not affect the power of the miracle at all, since only truth and error are its concern.
You are both more miracle-minded and less able to recognize fear because of your stronger but split identification. Bill also characteristically is less miracle-minded, but better able to recognize fear because his identification is more consistently right but weaker.
Together, the conditions needed for consistent miracle-mindedness, the state in which fear has been abolished, can particularly well worked out. In fact, it was already well worked out before.
Your idea about the real meaning of possession should be clarified. Your own denial of fear, this refers to a visionary experience of Helen's, introduced some error variance, but not really a significant amount. However, there is always a chance that as the size of the sample increases, what was non-significant before may attain significance. So we had better get this out of the way now while you are still within the safety margin.
Fear of possession is a perverted expression of the fear of the irresistible attraction. Aside, yes, this does apply to homosexuality, among other errors, where the whole concept of possessing or entering is a key fear. It is a symbolic statement of an inverted decision not to enter into or possess the kingdom. In physical terms, which is emphasized because of the inherent error of soul avoidance, real physical creation is avoided and fantasy gratification is substituted.
The truth is still that the attraction of God is irresistible at all levels, and the acceptance of this totally unavoidable truth is only a matter of time. But you should consider whether you want to wait, because you can return now if you choose. Note to Helen, you're writing this with improper motivation, but we will try it anyway. If you are to stop, do so immediately.
Possession is a concept which has been subject to numerous distortions, some of which we will list below. One is possession can be associated with the body only. If this occurs, sex is particularly likely to be contaminated. Possession versus being possessed is apt to be seen as the male and female role. Since neither can be conceived of as satisfying alone, and both will be associated with fear, this interpretation is particularly vulnerable to psychosexual confusion. 2. From a rather similar misperceptual reference point, possession can also be associated with things. This is essentially a shift from one that is usually due to an underlying fear of associating possession with people. In this sense, it is an attempt to protect people, like the superstition about protecting the name we mentioned before.
Both 1 and 2 are likely to become compulsive for several reasons, including A, they represent an attempt to escape from the real possession drive, which cannot be satisfied this way. B, they set up substitute goals, which are usually reasonably easy to attain. C, they appear to be relatively harmless and thus seem to allay fear. The fact that they usually interfere with good interpersonal relationships can be interpreted in this culture as a lack of sophistication on the part of the other, not the self, and this induces a false feeling of confidence in the solution based on reliability, not validity. It is also fairly easy to find a partner who shares the illusion. Thus, we have any number of relationships which are actually established on the basis, and others which hold together primarily because of the joint interests in 2. D, the manifestly external emphasis, which both entail, seems to be a safety device, and thus permits a false escape from much more basic inhibitions. As a compromise solution, the illusion of interpersonal relating is preserved, along with the retention of the lack of love component. This kind of psychic juggling leaves the person or juggler with a feeling of emptiness, which in fact is perfectly justified because he is acting from scarcity. He then becomes more and more driven in his behavior to fill the emptiness.
When these solutions have been invested with extreme belief, leads to sex crimes and to stealing. The kleptomaniac is a good example of the latter.
Generally, 2 types of emotional disturbances result. A, the tendency to maintain the illusion that only the physical is real. This produces depression. B, the tendency to invest the physical with non-physical properties. This is essentially magic and tends more toward anxiety proneness. C, the tendency to vacillate from one to the other, which produces a corresponding vacillation between depression and anxiety.
Both result in self-imposed starvation.
Another type of distortion is seen in the fear of or desire for spirit possession. The term spirit is profoundly debased in this context, but it does entail a recognition that the body is not enough and investing it with the magic will not work. This recognition accepts the fact that neither 1 nor 2 is sufficient, but precisely because it does not limit fear so narrowly, it is more likely to produce greater fear in its own right.
Endowing the spirit with human possessiveness is a more inclusive error than 1 or 2, and a step somewhat further away from the right mind. Projection is also more likely to occur, with vacillations between grandiosity and fear. Religion is, in a distorted sense, is also more likely to occur in this kind of error, because the idea of a spirit is introduced, though fallaciously, while it is excluded from 1 and 2.
Witchcraft is thus particularly apt to be associated with 3, because of the much greater investment in magic.
It should be noted that 1 involves only the body and 2 involves an attempt to associate things with human attributes. 3, on the other hand, is a more serious level confusion because it endows the spirit with evil attributes. This accounts both for the religious zeal of its proponents and the aversion or fear of its opponents. Both attitudes stem from the same false belief.
This is not what the Bible means by possessed of the Holy Spirit. It is interesting to note that even those who did understand that could nevertheless express their understanding inappropriately. The concept of speaking in many tongues was originally an injunction to communicate to everyone in his own language or his own level. It hardly meant to speak in a way that nobody can understand. This strange error occurs when people do understand the need for universal communication, but have contaminated it with possession fallacies. The fear engendered by this misperception leads to a conflicted state in which communication is attempted, but the fear is allied by making the communication incomprehensible.
It could also be said that the fear induced selfishness or regression, because incomprehensible communication is hardly a worthy offering from one Son of God to another.
Knowledge can also be misinterpreted as a means of possession. Here, the content is not physical, and the underlying fallacy is more likely to be the confusion of mind and brain. The attempt to unite non-physical content with physical attributes is illustrated by statements like the thirst for knowledge. No, Helen, this is not what the thirst in the Bible means. The term was used only because of man's limited comprehension and is probably better dropped.
The fallacious use of knowledge can result in several errors, including the idea that knowledge will make the individual more attractive to others. This is a possession fallacy. The idea that knowledge will make the individual invulnerable. This is the reaction formation against the underlying fear of vulnerability. C. The idea that knowledge will make the individual worthy. This is largely pathetic.
Both you and Bill should consider type 4 very carefully. Like all these fallacies, it contains a denial mechanism, which swings into operation as the fear increases, thus cancelling out the error temporarily, but seriously impairing efficiency.
Thus you claim you can't read, and Bill claims that he can't speak. Note that the depression is a real risk here, for a child of God should never reduce his efficiency in any way. The depression comes from a particular pseudo-solution, which reads, "A child of God is efficient. I'm not efficient. Therefore, I'm not a child of God."
This leads to neurotic resignation, and this is a state which merely increases the depression.
The corresponding denial mechanism for 1 is the sense of physical inability or impotence. the denial mechanism for two is often bankruptcy. Collectors of things often drive themselves well beyond their financial means in an attempt to force discontinuance. If this idea of cessation cannot be tolerated, a strange compromise involving both insatiable possessiveness and insatiable throwing away bankruptcy may result. An example is the inveterate or compulsive gambler, particularly the horse-racing addict. Here, the conflicted drive is displaced both from people and things and is invested in animals. This implied derogation of people is the cause of the underlying extreme superstition of the horse-racing addict. Here, the conflicted drive is displaced both from people and things and is invested in animals. This concludes Chapter 1 of the Urtext Manuscripts.